you, Alexa, for joining today. I'm really, really, really excited to have you. And I think definitely a very exciting topic for probably a lot of people, irrespective of actually where they sit in organisational structures, but certainly in our world, I feel. So today we're going to be talking about how AI is transforming the organisational structures. And yeah, very excited to talk about it further. And maybe you'd like to start by giving a bit of an introduction as to yourself.
Oh, great. Thanks, Hope, so much. It's really great to be here. And thank you for inviting me to come and join you and share my perspective with your listeners on how exec roles are evolving in the age of AI, and also how companies are going through so much change, and they are changing what their org designs mean for a modern organisation today. I guess my background looking at this comes from my time in executive search, but also in-house, where I started my career with executive search firms like Harvey Nash, but also Heidrick & Struggles as well, before moving in-house about 10 years ago to lead talent functions for executive hiring, assessment and succession planning at places like Visa, but also Fortune 500 companies like Baker Hughes. And today I'm currently consulting with Workday to help them with their talent strategy and succession planning as well.
Amazing. Thank you so much. And I think, definitely such a wealth of knowledge to come to this discussion with. And I'm sure you must have seen quite a lot of transition in the executive landscape throughout your career as well. Of course, AI is the burning topic at the moment. And I think that there's a multitude of different approaches, isn't there, to kind of what we're experiencing and the impact that it will have. But from your perspective, Alexa, how is AI transforming the workplace at an executive level?
Well, I'm so glad you asked that question, Hope, because there is a huge amount of change that I think we're all seeing, not least with the amount of changes at the top of the house with CEO changes that we've seen a lot of in the last 12 months. But also how companies are moving from being centralised to being decentralised, moving from being regional organisations to perhaps product organisations, or moving back to being global organisations as well. And I guess before I answer that question from you around how AI is sort of transforming the organisation, I think it's also important to look at how AI is enabling the business strategy, because whilst there are a lot of tools and apps and new products that companies are either designing or reusing as the workforce, the reality is in this gold rush rapid adoption of AI, it's really enabling the business strategy as well. And so when I think about what does that mean for executive roles, it's really meaning that those roles are probably having much more of a core emphasis on certain areas like capabilities, mindset, but also leadership skills as well. And the C-suite roles are evolving, whether that's the Chief Marketing Officer role, the COO role, the CFO role, but also the Chief Supply Chain Officer roles. They're seeing those roles become a lot broader in their remit, and those capabilities that those leaders have are going much further beyond where they would traditionally be in their various different business units or in their functions. And so what I'm seeing at the moment are C-suite roles are evolving to be more operationally effective, and also drive greater productivity that's leading to greater results and ultimately greater profitability as well. But silos are really being broken down, which is really important today, because we've got to take on broader responsibilities to streamline the organisation, but also see things from a different perspective, which means that if you're working cross-functionally and you're engaging with your peers, your partners, you're working across different countries and business units, then that really helps drive collaboration as well. I mean, some of the roles which aren't new, but I think are just having a different perspective or different emphasis on them, is like the Chief Transformation Officer role. It's a role that's been around for a while, but now the nature has really changed because the strategy is about accelerating the transformation in the organisation and driving organisational change through a culture of innovation, but also essentially speeding everything up because technology and AI adoption and integration is speeding everything up. So that Chief Transformation Officer role is now working with the Office of the CIO, with the Office of the CTO. There's a new role we'll come on to look at, which is the CAIO. Need to remember to get that right, but that's the Chief AI Officer, which is a new role that's come up. And so these roles are all evolving faster than actually, well, as fast, I should say, as the technology around them. And that Chief Transformation Officer role has always had a bird's eye view perspective of the organisation. But I would say that continues to be true, but much more of an emphasis on that role kind of being a specialist generalist, which is working at the top of the house across the enterprise. And I'm seeing a rise in these specialist generalist roles as well, where these individuals or these roles are really coming together, working, I guess, in a bit like a squad and a team, which makes me think of Spotify's model, their framework for development teams, where they're working in squads and teams to kind of be more agile and to really help drive collaboration and also bring new ideas to the table. And so we're seeing that when you do this, not only are you being more effective because you're working across those functions, but you're also having that end-to-end big picture view as well. So one of the newer roles that I'm seeing come onto the scene, Hope, is the Chief AI Officer role. That's something which has been introduced to some organisations, but not every organisation. And it's not just about digitizing those processes. It's really about leading the strategy for how AI is adopted, going back to what we said earlier, how AI is enabling the business strategy as well, and how AI is embedded into an organization, into its ways of working, into its systems, into its decision making, and ultimately into being compliant and ethical for employees to really use it, or for the end user, the customer, to use it as well. So if I think about companies like PwC in the US, Intel, Walmart, those are just a few that have just recently created the Chief AI Officer role, where they've either expanded the remit of the CTO to be CTO and AI Officer, or they've restructured their leadership team and actually elevated that role so it reports directly into the CEO. It's a really interesting time as companies grapple with the complexity to really navigate AI and really bring that holistic view, that end-to-end view that we were just talking about.
Especially given a lot of the nuance around that, I think, isn't there? You look at if there's a chief AI officer for, I don't know, like a big bank versus a consumer organisation, there are going to be a lot of different challenges, aren't there, in terms of how we can use and therefore adopt into processes or ways of working, any of those things.
Absolutely. And if you're a technology organisation or an AI native organisation, you probably don't have a CAIO, but the reality is it's your chief product officer who is the equivalent of that, because they're developing exactly those products and those tools. And I guess it reminds me of when the chief digital officer suddenly became trendy, sexy and exciting to be the next C-suite role that was added to an organization. And some companies obviously expanded the remit of the CIO and the CTO at that time, or had the role, as I said, as a standalone role that was then elevated to report directly into the CEO. But really, whether you're having it as an extended capability of your technology leadership organization or any other part of your organization, it's really about driving that enterprise-wide adoption of that new product, service, tool, whether that's internally or externally. And I think, when I read some of the press that's out there and I look at some of the statistics on CFO.com, actually, 72% of business leaders believe that AI will be the main driver of workforce transformation. And I think we can all see that happening right now, particularly as there's so much disruption, but also that it will enhance employees' work to engage at a more impactful level as well, versus just being task-based and administrative-based. And so whilst there are fears, naturally, about job displacement and uncertainty, there was also an article in OrgView that quoted about 48% of companies are saying that AI will replace jobs, but that's actually down from 54% the year before. And so perhaps we're becoming more comfortable with change and transitioning with AI and what that future will bring, whilst also recognizing that the company of the future will have humans and AI working alongside one another in order to bring those productivity gains, because you still need to have humans engaged in certain points of the work as well.
No, I think so as well. And it's definitely, we've definitely seen throughout the last couple of years, I think when it first, started to be the topic, the rise of ChatGPT and so on, I think quite a lot of fear involved, particularly as you then started seeing a lot of the transformations and, a lot of these roles that maybe were a little bit more operational being replaced by AI, right?
Yes.
Like there's been instances of that, but it does feel as though that's, that as we're using more and as we're experiencing more, there's more of a comfort there, but I think everyone's aware that it's, how do we shift with that as well and adopt to use it. And I guess, over the last couple of years, we've seen the rate of change in AI, it's been pretty dramatic, hasn't it? And I think the human perception of what it's doing and what we need it to do is changing with that quite dramatically as well. I mean, 2 years ago, I remember being at a roundtable that we were hosting. We were talking about future skills, but the topic turned to the advent of ChatGPT. And I think there was quite a lot of fear in the room, or maybe trepidation's probably a bit more of an accurate term for that, because you've got people whose entire careers have been based around human interaction and that's a career that's kind of based off of that. And of course, as we grow, we're using different technologies, but I think the rate of adoption for AI has been pretty significant, right? And I do think that we are a lot more comfortable talking about how we use and adopt, but it's interesting to think about that human touch and where we strike the balance.
There's a great article in the FT yesterday, actually, that talked about, does HR still need humans? I mean, it's quite a bold statement, and that's also quite sort of catchy as well. Because when you think about it, HR organisations are probably going through a significant change, perhaps tidal wave of change on so many different fronts as well. They're not just responsible for redesigning how employees work with AI, but they also have to train the workforce to implement the new technology in order to shift to a new job. Obviously, the downside to that is HR is also leading RIFs. They're supporting with the exits due to job losses caused by the widespread nature of AI. But actually, the article interestingly quoted Salesforce's Mark Benioff, where he said humans must remain at the centre of the story. And so perhaps 80% of corporate functions will end up being automated, but we'll always still need humans to do the work with the technology, not just because machines can't do it, but fundamentally people do just prefer to deal with people.
Yeah.
So I think that companies are starting to realise that they do need to bring about productivity gains, but it's also about having an engaged workforce that is working on higher value work, doing their very best work, making an impact, solving some of the most difficult challenges that we might have today, but also working in a way where they are enabled by AI. It's bringing new insights, fresh ways of thinking, and that any of those productivity gains, operational efficiencies need to then be reinvested back into the workforce, back into your human capital, back into your talent, so that that talent can upskill, reskill, broaden out their experiences, get different perspectives, learn new things, and then that will be really great for opening up new career opportunities as well as learning as well.
No, thank you for that. And it is really interesting to kind of, you know, sort of talk about the evolution of this. And what other roles do you see evolving as part of this?
So evolving, probably I think about like the chief ethics officer as well.
Interesting.
And that's more than just a compliance role. It's really about the responsibility to develop AI ethically and really establish those ethical guidelines to actively address a number of concerns, whether that's algorithmic bias, really understanding the technology's impact and the relationship that the company and technology have with society. There's a role over at Salesforce that was created back in 2019, where you've got a lady called Paula Goldman serving in that role as Chief Ethical and Humane Use Officer. So that's a really interesting role, and her background is super interesting as well. She's got a background in technology, in product, and in social impact investing as well. So you can really see how these roles and these experiences are evolving and really adding a huge amount of new value to an organisation in the current time. Then you've also got the role of the Chief Data Officer as well, which is evolving from really managing data storage and data assets to really strategically enabling AI capabilities. And I can see a time at some point on the horizon where sales and marketing functions come back together again under one business leader to streamline the organisation, but also to drive a greater understanding end-to-end of that customer or that client journey. The CFO role is evolving as well, broadening out into being much more of a business enterprise leader role, which may result in commercial operations or revenue operations coming to sit underneath the CFO, because it's really about, with all of these roles evolving, about how to create and define strategy, and then how to execute on that strategy in a fast, nimble, and really effective way. And really understanding how all of those pieces come together for a business, whether that's across products, sales, marketing, any of your corporate functions, and then lay that over with a matrix as well. It's really about having that pulse on the customer, understanding what's going on with employee sentiment, and also being able to tell your story in a compelling way externally to the investor base as well.
Yeah, which is a really fascinating balance to strike, isn't it? And you know, you're definitely seeing quite complex transformations underway, I think, with that aim in mind. So it's really interesting to learn about kind of your perspective on that.
And I guess
evolution, I suppose, isn't it?
Oh, completely. And everything is evolving around us sort of faster than we can track it.
Yeah.
I mean, one of the things that I enjoyed when I was in search was being able to have that exposure to different industries, different sectors, track talent moves and also market trends. I guess on the flip side, now sitting in-house for, you know, the last 10 years of my career, leading executive talent, which involves recruiting, but also talent strategy and succession, it means you're a lot closer to decision making internally, but also you're able to bring that external perspective to the internal discussion and really see how the business evolves, how you get to influence those decisions. And also, as we've just talked about, is see those roles evolve real time as well, and the types of skills and experiences that are needed. But I can certainly imagine, you know, in a future state, particularly maybe if you're in a technology organization, you know, one radical way of thinking about different roles evolving is to have two CEOs. You know, one CEO for the business in the way that we would expect, you know, a CEO role to run the business and to really drive the organization forward. But then maybe also to have a CEO for the technology of the business as well. And then maybe that tech CEO internally is a successor play for the company, the group, the enterprise CEO. But I think, you know, when you look at, you know, some of the more bold roles that have come about, I also think about like Moderna, who've recently merged their chief people officer with the CIO under a lady called Tracy Franklin.
That's really interesting.
It's so different, will it be the norm of things to come? I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
But obviously in Moderna's case, they're optimizing the mix of employees and agents. The traditional HR model perhaps doesn't work for them. Will it be right for everybody else to do it that way? Probably not. But it's a really interesting moment in time as we think about redesign, how the work is done, and also how do we drive efficiencies as well. That will also bring new insights and new career development tracks for individuals.
Yeah, it's interesting that because, it does really feel like we're living through kind of case studies almost, in the, we've got a lot of organisations that are fairly traditionally structured. We've got a lot more that are kind of making those pivots, to be a little bit more agile, or, like you say, some of these newer roles that we're starting to see emerge. It's really interesting to see kind of how that plays out. And as you say, is it the norm for them, or is it going to start to be the norm elsewhere as well? And when you think about how that then, informs leadership and the capabilities that one needs to have to be a successful executive leader, because I imagine there's probably many asking that question at the moment. Would you say that to be a leader in any executive field, you'd need to be AI literate, or?
Well, I think that's like a really great question to be asking. I think organisations probably need to ensure that their talent, whether that's senior leadership or otherwise, they need to develop some sort of literacy in AI, but is it realistic to expect people to be fluent in AI? Probably not. Particularly since I've noticed everybody is self-paced learning.
Yeah.
I think we're starting through experimentation, we're using it in our personal lives, then we might be extending that into our professional lives. There are so many new tools that have come out from AI, whether that's Claude, whether that's ChatGPT, whether that's Gemini, which is Google's product.
Mm-hmm.
It just seems that there is a lot out there, and everybody is trying to get to grips with what are the limitations of it, but also where does it help them accelerate what they need to do, free up their time to work on other things as well. So I think it's really important for executives to signal that tone from the top, to really understand, what are the limitations of the technology, but also where can it help them accelerate productivity, new insights, operational effectiveness that really helps streamline the organisation. And that tone from the top of the house about how do you then reinvest or redeploy those efficiencies or gains into other parts of the organisation is really important to galvanise everybody to come together, because ultimately when everybody shares in this success, everybody wins.
Yeah.
And it's about being one team, one organisation. AI isn't just about the technology, but it's also about how do you create a more efficient organisation that is more productive, that drives growth and profitability, which in turn, as we've talked about, brings about new career opportunities, new learning pathways, and new personal growth as well.
Yeah. And it's a really interesting point that you make about, that kind of, I guess, the tie-in between, sort of personal growth and how we're kind of all on this, so our own kind of individual journeys, as well as how that then feeds into, what does my role need to look like in 5 years' time or 10 years' time, and what skills and capabilities do we need to be building? If you're, what's your view on how business leaders should and will work collaboratively and cross-functionally in a way to galvanise the whole workforce?
Well, I think a big part of it is in all of this change that we're going through, with roles being blended, orgs becoming flatter, more leaner, more collaborative, is the role of the leader is really going to be about inspiring strategy, galvanizing teams to really do their very best work. And that comes back to, so what is the purpose of work? And I worked with a really great leader once who said to me, work is not a place I go, it's something that I choose to do. So I think the reason why that quote has stayed with me is because it will be really important as we chart a course through all of this change and transformation that we're witnessing in business and around the world. And so leaders will need to lean into those very qualities that make us human and differentiate us from AI. So this means that those human skills like critical thinking, intuition, judgment, communication from people will be really important, as will the ability to be open-minded, to apply pragmatic common sense to something, and also be able to rationalize a decision or make decisions with different sources of information. Because when we're enabled by AI, we need to make sure that we're layering this with our own personal view and taking an independent perspective on it. We really need to be careful that we're not putting too much trust in the output of that information, but we're continuously verifying it. We're looking at it through a different lens. And I think things like experience and knowledge and learning really provides us with that ability to see things from a different perspective, which you gain through your foundational early days of your career, but also in all of those collective experiences that you've built up as well. And so for me, staying curious and open-minded, adaptable, being a lifelong student of learning are just some of the things that really help leaders to prepare as they chart their path forward. It's not really just about embracing AI, but also how do you adapt your own leadership to prepare for your own journey.
That is such a fantastic point to end on, Alexa, and thank you so much. I think, whenever we have conversations with exec individuals, particularly about, motivators and so on, I think it's this view that, we want to adopt the technology, we want to grow with it, but I think people crave the human touch, and that will be there for forever, I think. We want those, those interactions that we, that kind of make us who we are fundamentally. And so it's really interesting to think about what the role of a leader is going to look like throughout this changing time, both by way of kind of technical capability, but also then, those kind of interpersonal leadership skills that individuals are going to need to have to guide everyone through quite a dramatic transformation.
Yes. Well, it's guide and it's galvanise, but it's also being able to set strategy and hold people to account at a time of so much change. But also, as we've talked about, having that bird's eye view about the organisation, but also understanding the depth of how the work gets done. And so as work gets redesigned and as leaders think through a broader set of responsibilities, a broader set of capabilities, they're perhaps operating across different business units that they might not necessarily have had full end-to-end responsibility on. They're going to have to lean into those human qualities that we talked about, really having great empathy with their team, with their people, being able to bring critical thinking, judgment, being able to communicate really clearly as well and concisely, but also recognizing that your workforce may be spread across different time zones, different countries, different languages, different ways of interpreting that information. I mean, I think it's a lot for a leader today to almost be a superhuman, whilst also, as you said, be super agile because of the technology that it's bringing. And so when you think about that hybrid workforce of humans and agents, it's like you have to have a two-track mindset over how to manage and lead through that, whilst also recognizing you've got to manage your own energy levels to be able to keep up with the demand, the pace, the thinking, the ability to constantly pivot, adjust, and navigate through, I guess, the sort of tidal tsunami waves that we're seeing, change organisations.
That is what it feels like, isn't it? It's the kind of cycles of change are getting ever shorter. And
ever faster.
Yeah, exactly. But thank you so much, Alexa. I've absolutely loved this. I think it's the conversation, isn't it? And I've really appreciated your expertise. So thank you very, very much.
Oh, thanks so much for having me, and I hope your audience enjoy our conversation. I know it's been a great morning with you.